All righty, we've hit 8 o'clock, so good morning, everybody. Greetings from rainy Urbana, Illinois. I'm Jonathan Coppess.
And I'm Nick Paulson.
With the University of Illinois' Department of Agriculture and Consumer Economics. We are going to get started now with our Friday morning weekly webinar on the Farm Bill and the farm programs in the new Farm Bill, as well as going over the APAS, the Agricultural Policy Analysis System, web-based application or online tool. You should be able to see those on the screen in front of you right now. The APAS tool on the right-hand side, and then we've got a few slides we're going to run through there on the left-hand side of the screen, just as kind of an overview. So our goal here this morning is to give an overview of the programs, kind of where things stand, and then we're going to probably dive a little bit deeper, do some examples on the base acre reallocation side of this, use the calculator for that to help maybe inform a little bit better about base acre reallocation. And then obviously we'll be taking questions throughout, and we'll take questions at the end. As we mentioned a little bit ago, these webinars are archived and will be available on the Farm Bill Toolbox. You see that website down there at the bottom of the page. They are archived there and available to view again if needed. And I think with that, maybe we'll get started here, Nick, and start talking about the farm program's decisions and the tool that we have in front of us.
All right, let's go.
So we want to start first again by thanking all of our coalition partners. This has been a big effort that has required or has used quite a bit of work from a whole bunch of folks across the country. We really want to thank them for working with us and for providing input, and more importantly now, they are a big part of this outreach effort. And so the universities you see right there, if you know anybody at them, certainly get in touch, and then more information will be coming out as we move forward. And just as a reminder, the Farm Bill Toolbox that's on farmdoc is what we look at as sort of the one-stop resource, your one-stop shop for all kinds of information, background information, and analysis on the Farm Bill and the farm programs. You see that website up there in front of you. And then the web-based decision tool, the Agricultural Policy Analysis System, the website is there as well. As we talked about last week, the way we're kind of looking at the decisions and the issues in front of us with this Farm Bill is we got about 3 sets of decisions, and we've tried to break it down into 7 steps for farmers and landowners as they go through making those three decisions. You know, up front, we want to remind everybody that the decisions are a one-time decision, and they are irrevocable, and they will be made by FSA Farm. And as you see on the screen in front of you, these are the 3 decisions: the payment yield decision, the base acre decision, and the program election. Going through the Farm Bill Toolbox on that website, you will see a set of these decision steps to walk through. We're going to go through them here. And step 1, obviously, is to collect information. Hopefully everybody out there has seen, can find, can locate, and has handy the FSA August letter that provides the base acres, the program yields, and the acres the FSA has on record as being planted on that FSA farm in recent years. The other thing you will need is a yield history, particularly for 2008 to 12, and FSA has made it clear that they will accept crop insurance records. However, this is actually a self-certification in the sign-up process, in the decision process, so you want to have your records to go through the tool and make the decision. When you go into FSA, you will be certifying at that time with FSA, subject to spot checks and audits. Step 2 here is the decision to retain or update yields. We'll get into this a little bit more, but we want to note it's a landowner's decision. This is for the landowner, which may not necessarily always be the producer. So the decision is going to involve whether you keep what you currently have as a payment yield, or will update it to 90% of the 2008 to 12 crop years. That does not include any year in which you did not plant the crop. So you don't enter in those years if a crop was not planted on that farm or that specific crop. But it does include years that have low yields. There is a plug yield for it. Again, you need your cropping history. And we also want to note that this is a crop-by-crop decision. You can update payment yields for one crop and not the others. And certainly figure you always want to look to update to the highest yield.
It is crop by crop and farm by farm. So you could update your corn payment yield on one FSA farm and not the other. Also just want to reemphasize that updating payment yields is a landowner decision. We already had a couple questions trickle in about who makes what decisions. Depends on what decision, which of the three decisions you're talking about here, but the updating payment yields is made by the landowner, regardless of the rental agreement, whether the landowner is the operator, whether they're crop sharing, whether they're cash renting, whether it's some kind of hybrid lease. The landowner does make that decision.
And of course, the APAS tool will provide you with a quick calculator. If you want to make that decision, you can do so on that quick calculator. And you see the pop-up screen there in front of you. You pick your state and county and enter your yield history. Nick, let's go into the base acre reallocation decision then.
Sure. So this is step 3. Covers the second decision in this kind of group of 3 decisions in the Farm Bill. Reallocating base acres is also a landowner decision. So again, doesn't matter what type of rental agreement or whether the landowner is the primary operator. It's the landowner that ultimately gets to decide whether to reallocate base acres or retain the current base acres on the farm. Does apply to all program crops on the farm. Your total number of base acres on any FSA farm will not change as a result of what you decide here. So if you have a FSA farm with 100 base acres, you're still going to have 100 base acres even if you reallocate. So it's not an update, it's a reallocation. It would just change how many acres of each crop you might have within that total base that you currently have. Again, we're going to go through how that reallocation option is put together. It's based on the ratio of crops, program crops that you've planted from 2009 to 2012. So just like the updating payment yield decision, it's going to be a one or the other choice. Keep your current base acres, that's in the letter from FSA, or enter in your planting history from 2009 to 2012. That'll spit out a reallocation option. You just choose one or the other. The general guidance we're giving on that is just to look to increase base for crops with larger potential payments, or potentially reallocating your base if it better reflects what you plan on planting over the next 5 years. Number of farmers are going to have base in crops they no longer plant, and vice versa. So again, just kind of a couple things to think about there in that reallocation decision. But it is a landowner decision.
Yeah, and a couple big points there that Nick made that we want to emphasize, and that is that this is a all or nothing decision. So that's all the crops on the FSA farm with base acres. You either are reallocating for all of those or none of them, and it is a landowner's decision. And this is not an update. In the past, or others have mischaracterized this as a base acre update. This is not an update. So you cannot increase and will not decrease base acres in this decision. It is merely reallocating the existing base on the farm, or redistributing that base, if you will, among the crops based on what you've planted in recent years. One of the questions that's come in on this real quick that we want to address, there is a provision in the bill and the regulation for what's called generic base acres. Generic base acres are the old cotton base acres. Upland cotton is no longer a program crop in this farm bill, so that is not, upland cotton is not eligible for ARC or PLC. Upland cotton base are now considered generic base acres. They cannot be reallocated. So when the reallocation decision on a farm with upland cotton base, the thing you got to keep in mind is that upland cotton base becomes generic base. You can reallocate all other program crops, but you cannot reallocate the generic base. It will remain at the number that's on the FSA letter.
Jonathan, would you scroll back real quick in the slides to where we have the web addresses? There was a question on what the APAS tool
Sure.
address was. So it's just that fsa.usapas.com is the address for what you see there on the right-hand side of the screen.
And I should note that these two are interlinking. You see on the APAS tool, you can get into the Farm Bill toolbox. The same, if you go to the Farm Bill toolbox, there are multiple links back into the APAS tool. So the two sites are very much interlinked and interworking in that regard. Just one other, and we'll come back to this. There is a quick base acre calculator on the APAS tool here. It's also a pop-up screen that you can jump into, and we'll come back to that in a minute as we go through an example or two on base acre reallocation.
And I'll get just another question here while it's up on the screen. We have a question on basically whether you can update yields for a crop, but no desire to reallocate base. The question was specifically about soybeans, but this would apply to any crop. These decisions are separate. So again, it's the landowner on both of these, updating yields and reallocating base. You could choose to update your soybean yields, but not reallocate base. It's not really correct to say you're not reallocating just your soybean base, because reallocation would affect potentially all the crops on that farm. But you can update yields or not update yields. That doesn't affect whether you do or do not reallocate your base acres.
Right, that is a great point. And let's we got quite a few good questions, so we'll come back around to these. So just hang on a little bit for us here. We're moving now into step 4, which is the program decision set of steps. So we've gone through base acres and reallocation of them. We've gone through the potential to update payment yields. Those are the first couple steps. Those are by the landowner. The first thing we want to point out on step 4, and the way we look at the program decision is to break it down first by comparing the ARC, the agricultural risk coverage at the county level, that county revenue program with the price loss coverage program. Look at those two first and then step through some of the other programs. The first thing we want to note, and this was made clear last week when the regulation was published, the base acre decision is for the landowner. The payment yield decision is for the landowner. The program decision, however, is for the producers on the farm. And that is a key distinction because producers are defined in the statute and the regulation as only those individuals on the farm who have a share in the risk of the farm, the risk of producing a crop on the farm, and have the ability or the right to share in the marketings of that crop. In other words, in a cash rent, cash lease situation, the landlord in a cash lease is not sharing in the risk of that crop and thus is not making this decision as far as the program for that farm. So we want to clarify that, and I'm certain we'll probably have some more questions. But the key difference as you get into these program choices that in a cash lease situation, the landlord is not involved, and it's only the producers on the farm who are sharing in the risk of the crop. And we see that highlighted there at the top of this page. Just a quick reminder on the programs, ARC-CO is a county revenue program. It's going to use a 5-year Olympic average of the market year average prices. That's what MYA stands for, the market year average price. That's calculated by USDA based on what farmers have received for the crop in that marketing year. And it uses county yields in its calculations. As by comparison, price loss coverage, the PLC program is a kind of a standard issue countercyclical deficiency payment program. Whenever that marketing year average price is below the reference price that has been set in the statute, a payment is triggered for that crop. These are crop by crop decisions. It is entirely possible on your farm, on your FSA farm, to have ARC county on one crop and price loss coverage on another. So keep that in mind. That is different than the agriculture risk coverage individual program, which we'll get to in a minute. Sorry, Nick.
Sorry, Jonathan. I just wanted to jump in right now since we were covering that the fact that ARC County is based on county yields and that marketing year average national price from USDA. PLC is based on that same marketing year average national price. Just to be clear on what that marketing year average price is and kind of how it affects timing of when you might receive support or payments from these programs if it is triggered. That marketing year average, we'll just use corn and soybeans as an example. That marketing year for 2014 just started in September of 14, and it will go through August of 2015. So we won't know the 2014 crop year or 2014 marketing year, which affects the 2014 program year or crop year in terms of payments until just before harvest of next year. So there would not necessarily be any payments from these programs until around harvest time or maybe even a little later into the fall of the following crop year. Just get a lot of questions on what that marketing year average price is. It does differ from the prices that that are used and determine crop insurance payments and guarantees. That is a national cash price from USDA. It's not based on futures like crop insurance is. So just a little clarification on that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's also a reminder that the program payments for all of these programs, so all three programs, Ark County, PLC, and Ark Individual, all use that same marketing year average, and payments for them will not come out before October 1 of the following year. So the 2014 payments won't be going out before October 1 of 2015, in part because of that 12-month marketing year. So here on the screen in front of you, we won't walk through the specific details on this. You see the payment or the calculations for the Ark County program. The only thing I want to highlight is just a reminder we're using county yields. These are not your farm's actual yields for this crop. County yields are used both in the benchmark and the actual calculation. Keep in mind the payment rate has a maximum of 10% of that benchmark, and then the payments for this are on 85% of the base acres for that crop. So Ark County is going to pay out on 85% of the base for the individual crop enrolled in that program or elected for that program. By comparison, here's price loss coverage. Its calculation on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you see the reference prices that are in the statute for the crops for this program. Those reference prices will not change for the life of this farm bill. That is different than Ark County, in which the benchmark revenue will move over time with that 5-year Olympic average. It will start incorporating the years as we go through this farm bill. But on price loss coverage, those prices don't change, and we're just the payment rate is the difference between that reference price and the market year average price that Nick was talking about. And then again, this program pays on 85% of the base acres for the crop, much in the same way as Ark County. Anything else on Ark County or PLC we want to cover before walking through this step 5?
We are getting some more questions on who makes the decision. We got a question on if a flex rent is pretty broadly defined, so we want to I think be careful about answering that question. But does a flex rent, I'm assuming from the landowner's perspective, is the question is being asked, does that count as having risk? My answer to that would be most likely if your rental payment depends at all on some outcome that is unknown, that I think that would be interpreted, whether it's price-based or yield, whatever the yields are on the farm. I would interpret that as you having risk associated with production. I would guess even in cash rent situations, producers should be making their landowner aware of the decision they're making, making sure there aren't, even though you may have the right to make that decision, discussing it with the landlord, making sure everybody understands the decision that is being made. Another question we got is if the cash rent agreement, so the producer is taking all the risk and can make the decision, maybe that cash rent's only a 1-year contract and we're making a 5-year decision, that doesn't matter in terms of technically who has the right to make a decision here.
Yeah, that's right. That's a big issue. I think Nick's absolutely correct that even though the producers have this choice or they have the ability to make the decision, it's probably always a good idea, if possible, to communicate with your landlord. Obviously, understanding that landlords can certainly be hard to get a hold of if they're far away from the farm, but it is something you want to watch out for. And the key on that, when we say all producers on the farm, that is the current producer as of the sign-up deadline. So just kind of an interesting situation out there is it's possible that depending on when that lease is signed, I think typically around here we're looking late February, so the new tenant in that case in a cash situation would still have the opportunity before the deadline to make the decision on that farm. But it's made for 5 years, and that doesn't necessarily mean that tenant will be there for all 5 years on that farm, and so the decision does not change if the tenant situation changes. So just a couple things to keep in mind as you think through how to deal with this. You are making a 5-year decision. If you're a cash tenant, you're making a 5-year decision on that land, and it will not change even if you're no longer the cash tenant in some of the years after the decision is made. But it's the producers who are in the lease, in a cash lease situation. It's the producers who are in that lease when the deadline is in place. And we'll go through the deadline here towards the end. But it's a good point, and we'll probably got more questions on that as we go. We see quite a few of them coming in. Again, we want to thank everybody for sending in questions, and we will get to them as we can throughout this process. Nick, we got step 5 up here. This is the ARC individual. You want to run through this one a little bit?
Great. Give me the fun one. So step 5 is, as we take you through this 7-step process towards making the 3 decisions, we do want you to consider ARC individual as an option. This is, if you thought ARC County was relatively complicated, ARC individual gets even more complicated. This does involve, it is another revenue program similar to ARC County. It does have a guarantee based on historical revenues. One of the main differences between ARC individual and ARC County is that it is based on a measure of farm level revenue. And the key piece there is it does use your farm yield history. It's not based on yields at the county level. It's based on your actual farm yields. Same thing to determine whether or not payments are triggered. It's not the actual yield in the county for that year that is used to compare actual revenue to the revenue guarantee. It is your farm level yield. It does use the same marketing year average prices, though, both historically for the guarantee and the actual marketing year price for coming up with that actual revenue measure. This program does involve all crops planted on the farm, all program crops planted on the farm. So it's not simply corn revenues that determine payments or soybean revenues that determine payments. It is a whole farm type of revenue program. So historically, depending on what you plant in any given year, there are rules, regulations in the program that will determine a revenue guarantee based on your historical yields and the historical marketing year average prices for those crops. And then again, what you plant, the actual revenues you receive are based on the actual yields on that farm for that crop, and the national marketing year average prices. The guarantee uses a 5-year Olympic average. Again, that Olympic average, though, is based on multiple crops, whatever you're planting on the farm that year. Those things are added or weighted together to come up with an average revenue measure across the crops planted on that FSA farm.
Yeah, it's a little more complicated in that it's an interesting feature that the actual planted acres will be used in the calculations to weight it. Couple other considerations for this. Again, as Nick pointed out, we're dealing with the sum of all covered commodities with base acres on that farm. We also want to note that the producer's share of all farms in the state that are also enrolled in individual ARC will be calculated together. And finally, the planted acres determine it, but the big issue is that you're paying on 65% of the base for all of the program crops on the farm. Keeping in mind that ARC County is 85% of the base for the crop, PLC is 85% of the base for the crop, but ARC Individual is 65% of the base for all the crops. Here's just the calculation again, kind of highlighting the same issues that we were just discussing. Market year average price, you calculate the crops individually to get a revenue. You get the Olympic average of the revenue. Keeping in mind Olympic average means dropping the year with the highest and the year with the lowest. Then you weight those averages, Olympic average revenues, and add them together. And that is a quick look at the ARC individual program calculation. Step 6, then, we've got come back around and consider the supplemental coverage option. This is a crop insurance policy. So we always want to start off and remind everybody that ARC County, PLC, and ARC Individual are the Title I commodity support programs that have no cost. Those are the FSA programs. Supplemental coverage is different. It is a crop insurance program. That means you'll pay premium. 65% of that premium will be covered by the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation in the way you do with other crop insurance policies. But it is crop insurance. It doesn't use 5-year Olympic averages. It's going to use the same prices that crop insurance uses to calculate its numbers, revenues. It's going to use the actual yields on the farm in that year, and it's going to use for what crops you've planted. So base acres do not matter for SCO. Payment yields do not matter for SCO. This is a crop insurance program. We also want to point out the way it works is that it is a county trigger at 86% of the county numbers, and the coverage level for SCO goes from that 86% down to whatever your underlying individual combo policy trigger is. So, for example, if you're at 75% in your underlying, and here's just a quick kind of way to look at that. If you're at 75%, then SCO would go from 86 to 75, and you'd have your deductible range there above 86. Keeping in mind that it's a county trigger that's applied to your individual policy's deductible, which makes for some different aspects of how that's calculated. I don't know, Nick, if you want to highlight some of that calculation, but it operates a little bit different than typical crop insurance programs. It's a little bit of a hybrid, I guess, maybe between GRIP and individual policies, because you're using a county trigger, but you're calculating indemnities and liability based on the individual farm's yields, for example. Also, we want to note that you cannot get SCO if you're in either of the ARC programs. You can only mix SCO with the price loss coverage program, or in a case where the crop is enrolled in none of the programs in Title I.
Yeah, maybe the only other thing to say on SCO is just to reiterate the fact that payments or losses are at the county level. The loss measures at the county level. So what happens at the county, whether it's SCO you're adding to individual yield coverage through a YP policy or yield protection policy, or if you're adding SCO onto an individual revenue program, revenue protection with the harvest price exclusion, it does require county yield losses or county revenue losses to trigger a payment. So kind of one of the implications of that is any farmer in the county that's carrying SCO may or may not receive a payment depending on whether the county triggers it. Those farmers may not experience farm level losses on their individual plan. County or SCO payments may be triggered, and they are experiencing losses on their individual plan. The county triggers the payment. The level of the payment or the size of the payment that any individual farmer receives is going to differ, because it's a payment rate determined by the county that is then applied to the individual farmers. Basically the value of their insurance liability. So farmers with different APH yields, different liability levels will receive different payments if they're in a county that does trigger SCO payments in any given year.
That's right. And we certainly encourage you to speak to your crop insurance agent to find out more information about this. It's also the case that SCO is first off, it's not available for the 2014 crop. It's only available beginning with the 2015 crop. And then it's going to depend on the county and whether RMA is able to offer that in the county. So some crops in some counties won't have SCO available even in 2015. And that's really just a case of not enough data to be able to rate the crop insurance product and provide it in that case. But there's a lot more on SCO, and we will probably get deeper into that program maybe in a future webinar. But for today, we want to just highlight some of the overviews of that. And then we want to make sure everybody is up to date on what we know currently from USDA as far as the decision deadlines for the decisions we're talking about. So you see them on your screen right there. The base acre reallocation and yield update decisions are currently ongoing, but the deadline for those decisions is not until February 27th of 2015. So there is a significant amount of time available yet for the landowners to make those decisions. So certainly there's no rush at this point in time to get into FSA and make the decisions. You've got until February 27th. And then we want to note for that ARC PLC election decision, the program decisions that we were just talking about, that decision time frame doesn't begin until November 17th of this year, and it is expected to run through at least March 31st, 2015. So again, a significant amount of time to make that decision, plenty of time to run the calculators and get a sense of how the programs look and what kind of expected payments may be for your farm and your crops. And certainly nothing to worry about right now while you're in the middle of harvest. So even on a rainy day in the middle of harvest, this is something that you can do some homework on, but do not have to feel any kind of rush to get in and make the decisions. And then this final note, because this comes up often, and we want to make sure we're clear about this. There's a difference between making the decisions on the farm and actually signing the contract or going through the sign-up to enroll in those programs. So you'll make the decisions to be in either ARC either one of the ARC programs or PLC. That's done at this point. It looks like March 31st is that deadline. And then you'll sign the contracts probably sometime beginning mid-April through June 1. So that means you go back into FSA to sign the contracts for the crops based on what you decided for that farm. So then you will enroll that farm and those crops in the program that you decided on, presumably by March 31st. The other thing we want to keep in mind is that the Farm Bill has consequences, if you will, for not making the decision by the deadline. If the decisions are not made by that deadline, and I'm talking about the program decisions, the ARC PLC decision, two things happen. First, the farm will forfeit any potential payments for 2014. So if you don't make the decision by the deadline, which right now looks like March 31st, 2015, you will end up forfeiting any potential payments that could have been made for the 2014 crop. The second thing that happens is those crops on your farm, your FSA farm, all crops, will be deemed to have elected the price loss coverage program. So that means from 2015 through 2018, if you go into FSA to sign up for a program, the sign up will be for price loss coverage only on that farm. So we just want to make sure everybody understands while there's plenty of time, the deadline is not for quite a ways away, but that deadline is important, and missing it will have consequences as far as the program choice for the farm. Those are the deadlines and a good overview of the programs. I think at this point, what we want to do is get through a quick example or two on the base acre reallocation decision that we have before us, and then start running through some questions. We've got quite a few questions. I think, Jim, if I saw your numbers right, we have over 400 people online with us this morning.
450.
450 of you tuning in this morning, so that's great. We appreciate it, but that also means a lot of questions come running into Jim, and he's doing a great job trying to take those in. And so we will continue to work through questions as we go. We appreciate your patience, understanding that we've got a great attendance here this morning, and a lot of folks asking some really good questions. So Nick, with that, let's do some base acre reallocation, unless you've got some other points.
I think just to kind of justify what we're going to do this morning. Again, we are going to be doing these webinars every Friday. The audio files, or if you want to view these things after the fact, they will be archived, available on the Farm Bill Toolbox website. Again, we've just given a rather quick overview of our kind of 7-step analysis or decision process that we're suggesting producers, landowners go through to make those 3 important decisions. Again, for today, we're going to try to focus on some base acre reallocation examples. We are getting a lot of fairly detailed questions coming in about some of the programs. So the third decision in that three decision set. We are going to focus on base reallocation today, just because we know there's a deadline in place for that, and we know that it's going to be earlier for that program decision. So we're going to kind of address that first. Also, just wanted to remind everybody, people who have shown up since we started, we do have quite a number of resources available with more details on the Farm Bill Toolbox website. So again, we have that 7-step process you can go through. If you want more information, there are videos, there are PowerPoint presentations that you can pull up that do go through some of those program details, and will address some of the questions that I've seen come in about what yields are used and rules for yields, and in the histories for the ARC program, how PLC program payments are calculated, and things like that. So we'll do our best to answer those questions, but realizing we probably aren't going to have time to get to everybody's question, a lot of those resources are available on the Farm Bill Toolbox website.
Yeah, that's right. And we will continue to update that Farm Bill Toolbox, add more information as we go, as we get it both from questions and further work, analysis, and a better understanding of things as we live with the programs a little bit longer. So we certainly encourage you to go to the Farm Bill Toolbox as often as possible, and hopefully a lot of the questions you have or that come up can be answered there. So we're going to do a couple just simple examples of the base acre reallocation through the quick calculator on APAS. You see over here on the right-hand side of the screen, the pop-up window that comes from clicking on the quick calculator base acre reallocation button on APAS. Again, that's the Agriculture Policy Analysis System. This is the online web-based tool that has been developed to work for farmers and landowners in the decision process. So what I did is to simply select a crop, add it to the calculation, and now we're going to enter that information for the base acre reallocation decision. We'll do first just kind of a simple corn-soybean example that we have here. And maybe the big reminder on this, Nick, as I'm typing in numbers, is that where's this information come from? We're just reminding everybody where they can find this information.
Sure, I'll talk for a little while you enter numbers. So
multitasking maybe not be my greatest skill here.
Right. So what Jonathan's doing is using the quick kick calculator in the APAS tool if you just want to think about the base acre reallocation decision. So we have more involved options in the APAS tool. We'll hopefully have a little time to take a look at some of those things. This is one of the blue buttons, specifically the base acre reallocation. This is relatively quick and simple. All the information that Jonathan is entering right now, I think you might have an extra digit there in your 2012, Jonathan. Everything that Jonathan's entering right now would be coming from that letter that you would have received from FSA for one of the farms on that letter. So again, most operators, landowners, in their letter, they're going to have multiple FSA farms, or very, very possible they have multiple FSA farms. Jonathan is entering the information that would be in that letter for one of the farms. So what you would want to do if you were, again, considering base reallocation and you want to use the quick calculator, hit the button, this pop-up window comes up. You're then going to add any of the crops for which you have historical or existing base acres. So that would include all of the crops listed on your letter that currently have some level of base acres on the farm. You'd also want to enter any crop that you had planted acres for from 2009 to 2012. Again, all of those would be listed there. Any crop, even if it doesn't currently have historical base, any crop that you had certified planted acres on from 2009 to 2012, you'd want to pick all of those from that drop-down menu and add them to the calculation with the Add to Calculation button. Then what Jonathan's doing is for any crop that does have existing base, he's entering that number there on the very left-hand side. So this farm currently has 1,099 base acres in corn, 697 base acres in soybeans. Then the 2009 to 2012 numbers are, again, the certified planted acres to those crops. He's entered those in for 2009 to 2012. Once you have that data entered, again, all of this stuff would be in that FSA letter. You can hit Calculate Reallocated Base. What this does is it tells you what your options are. Again, you can keep the existing base acres you see on the left, 1,099 in corn, 697 in beans, or based on what was planted from 2009 to 2012, you could reallocate those base acres, and it'd be 1173.85 in corn, 622.15 in beans.
Yeah, and I think the key here, this calculation, again, is the average of these planted acres on this farm over the 2009 to 12 crop years. In the case of a farm in which you're, say, rotating crops completely, so I would have all the acres in 1 year in corn and 0 in soybeans and then vice versa, you do put the zeros in. Those do calculate out. We can do a simple example of that here in just a minute as well. But you see what this ends up doing is taking the ratio of what you planted in those crop years as compared to all of the program crops you planted on that farm, and then recalculating that against your total base acres. So the total number of base acres does not increase. You just see that it redistributes amongst the program crops. So in this simple corn-soybean example, we'd see that you could increase corn base with this decision based on due to the way the planting decisions have played out over the last 4 years. And I think in general, based on the way the programs look like they're going to be operating, if you're able to increase corn base, I think we typically think that's probably a good idea for the farm. One of the things I also want to note that I really like about this quick calculator is that if you happen to be a landowner instead of a producer, and the only decisions you're going to have to make are the program or the the base acre reallocation and the updated yields, then these quick calculators are going to work nice for you because you don't have to go through a lot of data entry for the individual farm as far as the program decisions are made. So just again, a quick example there. And as Nick said, you could then make this decision or keep your base acres at the 1099, 697 in this example. And I'll do one more example here while we
hit delete.
While we think through this, just to get a few more crops and maybe another way to look at how this is gonna work. So we'll take a different kind of setup. Let's say we got barley. Oops.
We did get a question come in. I can answer quick while Jonathan's setting this example up. One of the attendees asked why the 2008 information was also included in the FSA letter if we're only looking at 09 through 2012 for base reallocation. Payment yields are based on payment yield updating is based on 2008 2012. So that information may be relevant for the payment yield update, because if you had planted acres in 2008, you will need to provide a yield for that crop in 2008 in the payment yield update calculation when you're considering that option.
Right. So I'm entering the existing base acres for this farm again from that FSA letter that you would have gotten from FSA. And we'll get those in and then look at the planting history then for this this farm. And one of the things we notice right off the bat is while they've got barley base, they have not been planting barley the last few years. And so that will impact the calculation for the base. As we go forward, you can see oops. A little bit of data entry for us as we sort out. I think I missed a year in there. I missed one. See, this is why I shouldn't type and talk at the same time, right?
So when we do get to the point of entering the oat and wheat yield histories as well, and we hit that calculate reallocated base, you will see that the option again will be to keep the existing base allocation where you have base acres in all 4 crops. Or there will be the reallocation option. That reallocation option will have 0 barley base. And we did get a question a little earlier about what happens if you reallocate and you zero out the base for a crop. Do you lose that forever? If you consider forever at least the life of the next farm bill, I guess the answer to that question is yes. We never know what reallocation rules might come into play in future farm bills, but you would have 0 base acres in barley in this case, at least for the next 5 crop years or through 2018, which is the period that this farm bill does cover.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You never know what will happen in future farm bills, but probably the best assumption for you to make is that if you zero out base, you've zeroed out base for that crop on that farm. And it would take Congress would have to make some significant changes in the next farm bill to revive, if you will, or bring back the base. So just in this example here, you see we have barley, corn, oats, and wheat. We have base on all 4 crops, but we've only been planting corn and oats on this farm. And so that reallocation decision here will end up zeroing out barley and wheat base. In this example, if you wanted to reallocate as the landowner, that would be your decision. Either the 4 base acres as distributed across the 4 crops on the left-hand side, or the redistribution or reallocation there on the right-hand side of 336.8 and 573.7. Again, the total number of base acres in this example has not changed. And maybe one of the things here before we jump into questions because I think this kind of makes for an interesting example as part of this decision. We talk about do you want to update in order to increase a certain crop? Do you want to make that decision based on whether or not you are planting more of one crop or the other, or you've sort of changed your planting rotation? And then the other part of that is, do you want to look at the the program payments. And again, we remind everybody that on that APAS tool, you have a sample farm capability. And this is just a quick ability to look at the programs and how they'd operate, not necessarily on your farm or any actual farm in the area, but a simulated farm based on the data that we have, mostly from NASS, that will indicate the amount that's planted. You see that here in the crop reporting district, and it changes based on the county. So how many acres are planted to which crops in that county, and then we build this simulated sample farm out of that. In this case, these are not the base acres we were talking about, but these are certainly an example of how it would work. In this case, Cass County. And then you get into here and you see the expected program payments. And so if you're looking at the base acre decision, even if you're the landowner and not going to be making the program decision, you may want to factor in how are these programs going to work by crop. So if you wanted to just look at corn, for example, in this county, you want to look at it by crop by acre. There's a multitude of ways to review the program expected payments of the program for a farm in that county. And again, this can be done without entering a lot of farm data, yield data, and so forth. And you've got 3 different price series here. We kind of want to remind everybody that the acronyms at the front, CBO is the Congressional Budget Office. Again, this is not a comparison of who's got the better forecast. What this actually works out very well as CBO has a higher forecasted price range in the next 5 years. USDA is a significantly lower price range in the next 5 years. And then FAPRI, the University of Missouri's institute that reviews baselines and does forecasts on prices, they tend to be kind of in the middle. And so this gives you a nice setup to compare the programs from a high price, a low price, and a mid-range price. Do it quickly on the farm, on a sample farm, a simulated farm in that county, and get a sense of that decision, which crops are going to make payments, what kind of estimated payments you might look at crop by crop, which can help in that decision. So, for example, in the payment acre or the base acre reallocation that we just did, it would have zeroed out barley and would have zeroed out wheat. And so you'd probably want to come into your county and get a good look on what kind of estimated payments there are for barley and for wheat.
I'll try to grab a couple of questions here. Again, some questions coming in on that base reallocation, the example, or just questions in general.
There we go.
There was one: why does the reallocation, or why did the reallocated acres total more than the acres that were planted? I didn't do the math, but it looks like one of our attendees noticed that maybe the numbers that Jonathan entered for planted acres were different than what ended up for the reallocation. Again, when you reallocate base, the total base acres don't change. So if you have a total of 500 base acres on a farm split across 4 crops, you're still going to have 500 base acres. It just might be in different crops than that base currently is. So, maybe the simplest example, the way that calculation is done is it's based on the percentage of program crops that you've planted to determine that new reallocated base acre option. So, real simple example, let's say you've got a farm with 4 crops that have base. The example Jonathan did had base in barley, corn, soybeans, and wheat, I believe. Maybe that farm has been doing a 50-50 rotation between corn and soybeans from 2009 to 2012. The reallocation option would be 50% base in corn, 50% base in soybeans. It all depends on what you planted from 2009 to 2012, the percentage of total planted acres that goes to each crop. That's what the reallocation calculation does. So again, your total base acres won't change. Just how many of those acres are in each crop is what the reallocation calculation does for you. Another question, I think I'm interpreting this right. Are those the only 2 options, that calculation we went through? Yes, there is just either your current or existing base acres that are on that letter, or entering in that planted acreage history will give you a reallocation option. Those are the 2 choices, one or the other. Keep current base or go with whatever that reallocation calculation spits out in terms of shifting those base acres to maybe some different crops or allocating them differently across the crops.
Yeah, and I think that there's a couple really good points on that. And it is entirely possible you plant more acres than you have base, or that you plant fewer acres than you have base, which is why we always want to point out that you're not going to increase or decrease your total base number. It's that ratio issue. And it's the ratio that amongst the crops and what you've planted. So just because if you've underplanted your base does not mean you're going to lose base. In the same vein, if you've overplanted or you plant more than you have base, you're not going to increase your base. And again, you don't get to pick and choose which base. You gotta reallocate all or none of it, and the only option you have is based on that record of what's been planted. And so again, we can look at the sample farms as a nice way to get a quick kind of idea about how the programs are going to pay, and use that as part of the base acre reallocation decision. And as we mentioned in that one before, you may want to think through what does barley look like under the programs, because that would have been zeroed out in that reallocation. Wheat would have been zeroed out on the base acres based on that reallocation of the example we just used. So just some things to think about as you try to sort through the base acre decision. I think we've got some time left here. We want to make sure we save some time for some questions, and so we'll try to get through some questions.
I'll let Jonathan maybe kind of read through some of the questions that have come in. Just make a few more points. Again, the goal that we've got here with laying these three kind of major decisions out and the 7 steps we'd like you to go through to think about those. Trying to split out, first of all, what decisions can be made independently of other ones, and then which ones kind of depend on other things. So maybe just to reiterate, the payment yield updating is fairly straightforward. There will only be 2 choices to consider. So again, don't get bogged down too much in the calculations. The tools will do that for you as long as you're entering in the data correctly. But ultimately, the landowner is just going to compare their current payment yield to what their optional updated payment yield would be. All right, there's only going to be 2 numbers for each crop on each farm that you're going to have to consider. That should be a straightforward decision, one that doesn't really affect or doesn't need to consider some of the other decisions, because it's pretty straightforward. If you can update payment yields, we would suggest that you go ahead and do that. If you have the yield information to justify those, if you are spot checked or audited, we'd suggest that you go ahead and do that.
So we've got, Nick, well, let me take real quick. We had a couple questions involving CRP, the Conservation Reserve Program out of Title II, and what happens for that. And maybe we can clear up a couple CRP issues real quick. The thing about CRP is that when the acres are under the CRP contract, the base acres are essentially suspended. So you're not receiving a base acre payment. You're getting a rental payment through CRP. When those acres come out of the CRP program, the base acres are restored back on the farm. So the way to think through this is, if your acres are coming out of CRP, whatever decisions have been made on the base acres for that farm will apply to those CRP acres when they come out of the contract, or when that contract expires, or the acres are released by USDA. And so that means if taking that simple example with corn and soybeans, the base acres in CRP when they come out would be allocated with the same allocation that you've got for that farm, and they will go under the programs you've already elected for that farm. So if you've, say for example, elected ARC County for corn and PLC for soybeans, then the base acres attributed to a corn will go into the corn ARC County program, and the soybean base will do the same. So they operate as they would as base acres. So there's not a new decision or anything else you got to do at that point. They move with the rest of the base on the farm when they come out of the CRP program. So we had a couple questions about that. One of them that also asked about the 1026. That's the form at FSA involving your conservation compliance. So the way this was asked is whether the farmer has to be signed up for CRP. That's not the case. You do not have to be in the CRP program, but you do have to ensure that you've got a 1026 form on file with FSA. That is your conservation compliance requirement for the farm program payments. To be eligible, you have to be in compliance with conservation provisions on highly erodible land and wetlands. That's the Form 1026, and that has to be on file with FSA.
These slides will be available as a print. You could go and download these slides to print as a handout. We will get those up on the Farm Bill Toolbox website. Links to that will be available on FarmDoc or FarmDoc Daily. Presentation itself, the audio file, and what you were able to view on the screen, that'll also be available for download at some point following the webinar today. Every week we do the webinar. That week's file will be archived and available on the Farm Bill Toolbox at some point following the live webinar.
That's right. We got a question here about power of attorney. If the renter or the operator has a power of attorney, that power of attorney should be good. It should remain. There should be no issues. You don't have to do a new power of attorney. And as a power of attorney, that will be giving the person holding the power of attorney the authority to make the decisions for that farm, in which case the landowner has given that authority over to the producer under the power of attorney, and that should stand. There should be no need to change or worry about that, and that will provide you with the authority to make the decisions for that farm. Another question here, if there's a tenancy change during the duration of the bill, is the landowner stuck with the previous tenant's PLC ARC decision, or can it change with tenancy? That is a great question, and the answer is it does not change. You cannot reconstitute your farm and change the program decision. You also do not change program decisions if tenants change. In the same way that if you sell that farm or buy a new farm, you are, if you're purchasing a new farm, you are purchasing the program decision that is attached to that farm in the same way you would be purchasing the base acres and payment yields for that farm. So it is a key component of this that there is, once made, this decision cannot be changed for the life of this farm bill. And that includes a change in tenant, a change in owner, or a reconstitution. None of those can be used to change the program decision on the farm. So want to be very clear about that. Another question here, don't owners and producers have to agree on program decisions since most leases are 1 year and this is a 5-year commitment? Again, we need to clarify that the issue here is whether or not the owner will be counted as or will constitute a producer on the farm, and that depends solely on whether or not they're sharing in the risk of producing that crop, whether they're sharing or able to share in the marketing of any crop that's produced. The way the regulation states, only those current producers. So in a cash lease situation, the landlord in a cash lease is not a current producer and is not involved in the program decision. The landowner still makes the base acre reallocation and payment yield decisions, but only the producers make the program decisions, and that decision will stay with that farm even if a different tenant is on the farm in the future. And so that's certainly an issue that you'll want to sort out, but it does have to be a unanimous decision for the program among the producers of record currently listed for that farm. And if it's a cash lease, that does not include the landowner or the landlord. And we've got quite a few questions on that, and we will continue to try to provide some more information on the Farm Bill Toolbox and maybe write up an article or two on that, just explaining that a little bit more. Nick, question just to maybe a reminder on how that market year average price is set, keeping in mind that the market year average price is used for all of these program crops in the program. So they're using that same market year average price, and maybe just a review of how that gets calculated.
So that would take, much like trying to explain any individual program, we could spend a whole hour on that. But that market year average price, again, the period starts right prior to harvest. For corn and soybeans, it starts in September. So the 2014 market year average price for corn and beans would have started at the beginning of September and goes through August of 2015. That would be the 2014 marketing year, would span kind of this fall and then the first 8 months of 2015. That is a measure of the cash price received by farmers throughout that marketing year period. So they do, USDA does calculate that number. That's a USDA number that they publish. They publish updates of that throughout the marketing year. forecast for what they think that'll be when the marketing year does finally end, when they have a final number, a range around that forecast to give some idea of, how high or low it could get based on how much time is left and how much grain they think will still be marketed through that marketing year. But it is based on an average of the prices that farmers actually receive. So, one thing I always tell producers to remember on that is if you've forward contracted grain, maybe you've got some grain sold for delivery during the marketing year at a price that's higher than what the current cash price is. That higher price is factored into that average that USDA calculates. Of course, all the grain that's marketed that is representative of all the grain that's marketed throughout the year, but it is the price that the farmers receive for grain delivered during the marketing year. A lot more detail could be discussed on that in terms of how that's calculated. I think the main points to make, though, are it's a USDA number that they put out, they publish, and it is based on the prices received for grain delivered during that marketing year.
Yeah, and we're just after 9 o'clock, and I think Jim's going to be a little generous with his time here and not throw us out of the webinar studio just yet. But we'll wrap up with a couple of questions that are good ones we want to clarify on. The first one involves that 70% of T yield in the benchmark revenue. We had a similar question asking about the reference prices and T yields in the benchmark calculations for the agriculture risk coverage, the ARC programs. What those do, those are basically operating as plugs in that benchmark, that 5-year benchmark calculation. So any crop year that the county in the county program or the individual in the ARC individual program, any year that those yields in that 5-year calculation are below the transitional yield for the county, that's something calculated by crop insurance. That's a crop insurance transitional yield. What happens if you're below 70% of that transitional yield, then the low yield in that calculation is replaced with the 70% of the transitional yield, the crop insurance transitional yield. Same deal with the reference prices. In the ARC county and ARC individual benchmark calculations for those programs, any of those 5 crop years that are in that average calculation in the benchmark, if in any year that the market year average price that Nick was just talking about is below that reference price, the reference price is plugged in to replace that low price. A great example of that is 2009 for corn. The market year average price was $3.55. The benchmark is $3.70. So in that the reference price is $3.70. So in that benchmark calculation, you would replace the $3.55 with the $3.70 and then run your Olympic average calculation. So a little bit more detail on how those work, the reference prices and the plug yields for that program. Simple checklist. That's a great question. We have what we think is a checklist, or at least the beginnings of this and the decision steps on the Farm Bill Toolbox. We also will update that step 7 for decisions to provide a downloadable form or some sort of like PDF that you can fill out, print off, or save. So there'll be more resources as we get closer to the deadline, but the fact that the deadlines are so far out in the future and everybody's working to finalize some of those, we will put those up at a later time. And that can also help serve as a checklist, as well as just walking through those 7 decision steps right now, I think, is one way we look at it. But that is something we can develop and get up on the Farm Bill Toolbox website here in the near future.
Right. The first 6 steps that we've got in that toolbox are really there to help walk you through the decisions, the information you need to collect, the information you need to enter so that you know what your options are. And again, take the time that we have between now and the deadlines to really try to understand the options that you have in front of you, the different programs that you can choose among, the option to update yields, the option to reallocate base acres. Make sure you understand those things. All the resources we're providing are designed to help you do that. Again, don't necessarily feel rushed to make a decision, but you should spend some time this fall and over the coming weeks and months using the resources we have out there to go into the analysis so you can make an informed decision as those deadlines approach.
So a couple more minutes here to try to get through a few more questions, and then we'll have to sign off for today. But this will be archived, and of course we'll be doing one again next Friday morning at 8 a.m. On the farmdoc website, the Farm Bill Toolbox website. Somebody's asking whether they think FSA will go through the recalculation exercise with the landowners. That's going to depend on your county office, but our advice is to work through the calculations with the landowners or help them work through it on their own. Somebody's asking about payment limits and impact on producers. We did not get into payment limits, and we can always discuss that at a future website. But just a quick note, the Farm Bill provides a overall cap of $125,000 from these programs in total. So that means if you end up getting payments, let's just do a simple example. Let's say I've got PLC on wheat and Ark County on corn, and I trigger payments for both of those. Those payments would be added together under that $125,000 cap. Now that cap can be, if you have a spouse, each one of you would have a payment limit cap. So that would be $250,000 for a married couple. But all the program payments are added together. The one exception is peanuts. Any peanut base, any peanut payment is calculated separately as against its own $125,000 payment limit. But that's a quick view of the payment limits for this Farm Bill. Just keeping in mind it's a little different. In the past, you've had a separate limit for each program. This time we're talking about one overall limit of $125,000 for all the programs that are operating on that farm. Let's see. Big preventive planning. That was the other one we want to probably touch on. Two answers to that. For the most part, what you plant in the crop year is not involved in the calculations for Ark County and the PLC program. In the case of individual Ark, the regulation states that if the farm has a complete wipeout, so part of the way that works is it uses the planted acres to weight the calculations in the benchmark and the actual. FSA has stated that if in the case of a complete prevent planted situation, they will determine using the history of that farm, they will come up with sufficient acres to make the calculation. So you're not out completely in a prevented plant situation. On the base acres, on the base acre reallocation component of the decisions in a prevent plant situation, what I'd point out is that what FSA is using in that letter for the 2009 to 2012 crop year are the planted and considered planted acres. So keeping in mind that that's a historical record of what you reported to FSA, and you should have reported those considered planted acres. If that's not the case on your letter, you want to get into FSA and talk to them about that and see if you can get that revised. But that should be included if it was reported properly to USDA, that any acres that were considered planted, considered planting meaning that they were prevented from or would have been planted in that case.
Same thing with double crop acres, where there was a question I noticed on double crop acres. So again, assuming that was related to the base reallocation calculation and decision, on that FSA letter, there are a number of categories of acreage, planted, double cropped, prevent plant. Maybe in a future webinar we can go through and really highlight which numbers go into that planted and intended to plant acreage number that will be used in the reallocation calculation, which one will not. But those are good questions. We'll try to address those more clearly in some future sessions, as well as that information being available on the website.
And so maybe we'll close out here with one final question, and this is an individual asking if we are at a price point with corn that makes for a difficult decision on PLC versus Ark County for corn. I mean, that's a great question. I think what I would want to point out first and foremost is that we're a long way from the deadline, and so we'll know a lot more about what that price will look like. But this comes up quite a bit in meetings and discussions with producers because, just sort of what is going on in the Chicago Board of Trade. And what I would remind everybody is what Nick was talking about, that the prices used in these programs are marketing year average prices. So the futures prices that we see and hear about on a daily basis right now, particularly as we get into what is typically the lowest price time of the year at harvest,
especially with a big crop,
particularly with a crop like what we're looking at out there. This is going to be the lowest price time, but that price point, that futures price, is not what's used in this calculation. It is the market year average price as compared to the most recent market year average prices. So we just kind of want to highlight that it not only is there plenty of time to make the decision and plenty of time up to at least March 31st when that deadline is currently set, plenty of time to know better what the market year average price is going to be, but always thinking through two aspects, that it's a market year average price and it's a 5-year decision. So today's price not only does not necessarily fully matter for the 2014 payments, but you're also making a 5-year decision for that farm that cannot change. And so you want to think about kind of where things may be headed in the future and what program works best on your farm. So some great questions. We really appreciate the attendance today. We had a lot of folks online, and we appreciate everybody taking a little time out of their day to join us for the Farm Bill webinar. Just a couple quick reminders. This webinar is being recorded. It will be archived, and you can access it anytime you want on the Farm Bill Toolbox on the farmdoc site, and that's Farm Bill Toolbox. You can just look it up online. It's at illinois.edu at that website. The APAS, the Agricultural Policy Analysis System, the web-based calculator or decision tool, is also online, can be accessed anytime you want to run through the examples and get a sense of this. And then just a quick reminder that we will be doing this again next Friday morning at 8 a.m. and every Friday morning throughout harvest, or until Jim gets tired of looking at us and locks the door to the webinar. But we will be continuing to do this, providing updates, providing more information, as well as reviewing kind of the overview of these programs. So we really appreciate everybody taking time today to go through this. Thanks again, and have a great weekend.